We have several moments for questions. Yeah.
So for this last talk, your first part of the talk, your consulting in the peer review process must add some time to the review. I'm wondering, what's your average time to first decision at eLife?
Yeah, good point. So in terms of the first decision after peer review, it's on average 30 days.
30 days?
30 days, yeah. So it's...
and how long do you give the reviewers to get back?
14 days. So it is true, it's extra effort and it's extra time. Some discussions take place over the course of a single day. You can, there's the kind of curiosity factor, what have other people said, what are they going to think to my comments? Most often it takes place over 2 or 3 days. But the trade-off, we hope, is that because they've decided upon what's essential, once it's resubmitted, we don't need to trouble them again. So that's the way we try to justify it.
And your average time to first decision is really 30 days?
First, yeah. So before peer review, the average time is about 3 or 4 days. After peer review, 30 days, 31 days. That's the median. Okay. Obviously with large variability.
Can I ask a question of Helen?
Oh, sure.
So the challenge with open data policies, which I applaud you for, is enforcing it. And who checks the data availability of all those 30,000 papers that you publish? Is it staff or is it editors and reviewers? Or
it's a little of a number of things. So we expect during the peer review process that editors and reviewers are looking at the data. We have a workaround with Dryad where the author can deposit their data there ahead of time, and we get a private link that gets included with the paper that gets reviewed. In terms of the final statements, though, we have internal staff looking at those.
At every paper?
Absolutely.
And do you know how much time roughly do they spend per paper?
Per paper, it's not very much. I mean, they've looked at a lot of these, so they're making sure that they're well written, that they have, if they say that they've deposited it somewhere, that there is a link or an accession number that we can publish. What takes time is if someone hasn't provided all that information, and then we do go back to them and work that into our final technical checks also.
And how many staff roughly do you have involved in that?
In that particular piece of it, I think it gets rotated around 2 or 3 people, but...
Really? 2 or 3 people for 30,000 papers?
Well, what can I say? That's for one of the journals. But each journal has its own process, and for some of the journals, that's incorporated into the final technical checks before things go off to production, and that's handled by external vendors in some cases, so there's a mix.
Okay. Thanks.
Sure.
Thanks for a really interesting session, and my question is to the whole panel, and it is in regards to the differences or nuances between reproducibility, replication, and reanalysis. Do we as editors, journals, and publishers have different roles or responsibilities or requirements for that, or different goals even? And I'm going to define what I mean by reproducibility and replication and reanalysis, because I'm not sure that I got it right, and you can correct me. Reproducibility is where you take the raw data is available and they give you the code and then you can actually get the same results. Replication is where you see what folks have done and then you go out and get your own data and do your own analysis and then it's the same. And then reanalysis might be a secondary where you take the available data and maybe come up with something completely new. So what's our role in all that? Is it different?
I'll take a first stab, and we
Sure.
can build on that.
I'm not sure how to express that.
I don't know quite how to address it. You do have a role, in my opinion, to be aware of the issues that lead to lower than expected rates of reproducibility, and to be open to new evidence that those rates of reproducibility are lower than what we expect. So that's probably the first and foremost role, in my opinion. and after that, it gets to the discipline-specific approaches to address that, and that's going to vary tremendously from the resources that each journal has. So the American Journal of Political Science replicates every single finding that they publish, and that they're a small journal, and they're well supported with graduate student work to do that. And their first several issues of doing that, it was obscenely onerous, and nothing replicated. Literally 0% of their first issue replicated, and they were just asking the authors to provide the code and the data that were used to make their main finding, and 0% of the articles were able to do that. Now it's much, much, much better after about a year or two of that happening. So to be willing to experiment, that's not expected for most publications because of the time that would go into that. But to go into possibilities with an open mind of possible ways to look for and then address the issues would be my recommendation. I'd be happy to hear if anybody else
I would just say that I think as we all know, there's different levels of ability to replicate something in sciences versus social sciences, and even in social sciences to control for all the variables, really, really hard. I think our role as publishers and editors is to ensure that when we publish something that we're providing that our authors are helping us to provide as much as we can about what those conditions were, so that a reader can choose, well, I'd like to do my own study, and I have enough information to know whether or not I might change a couple of things and see what else I can get, or I really want to make sure that I can do the exact same thing. And will they be able to? I don't know. I mean, even in the same lab, getting the same results more than once, right? That's going to be hard. So to me, the publisher's responsibility is to get as much of that out there as possible, to be as transparent as possible.
So maybe if I phrased it a different way, is if you had to pick one of the three, reproducibility, replication, or reanalysis, that you would map your requirements to, is it reproducibility? Because it seems it's the most manageable.
I think so, because that's
where we're
you're
at,
asking
right?
the author
Okay.
to say, what did you do? And what were the conditions? And where's your data? So that someone else can look at that and potentially do the same thing.
Along the same lines, yeah, I think the new editor at Psych Science is trying to also very much push toward the reproducibility aspect because it is more manageable. But one other aspect which I suggested before I left might be useful for, particularly in social psychology, would be for people to actually provide not just open materials, but actually videotapes of what they actually did, because sometimes, not in all areas of psychology, but particularly ones where it depends on social interaction, it can be really very subtle and not particularly verbal things that could be really important, and a picture's worth 1,000 words, quite literally. So that would be sort of an open materials with a little like separate sort of a thing attached to it to show that it's actually on video. So.
We're at time. I wanted to thank our panelists for coming and for sharing their experiences with it. And please take a handout at the back that gives some more information about all these different initiatives.